Well, here's the first of the individual section videos that'll help you to understand the material a little bit better. In some of them, especially in the first half of the book, I'll do a pretty good job of pointing you towards information that you really need for tests. The last half, you will have gotten a pretty good idea of how my testing goes, and you'll maybe be able to pick out the things that are testable material based upon how I emphasize certain things. But to help you the first test especially, I'll try to really point out when we've got some test material that you need to know about. Chapter 1, Section 1 introduces you to human resources and talks about the main functions that human resources does. Again, if you're in HR, you can expect, especially if you're a generalist, to touch on all of these things in the course of a day, a week, a month, whatever. If you are a specialist rather than a generalist, there may be one or two of these things that you do all the time and don't really touch on the other stuff. Most smaller companies have a lot of generalists because they can't afford to have a comp and benefits person and an insurance person and a health person and an employee relations and a discipline and all that kind of stuff. So somebody, 2 people, 3 people do all of it and share the responsibilities. But you'll see in the course of this video and reading through the first part of Chapter 1 that HR starts from an employer's, company's standpoint from the moment they open the doors, and that goes until late at night and forever and ever. From an employee standpoint, the HR interaction with you starts before you're ever an employee and goes until long after you quit being an employee. So the summary of the roles and the activities of HR is that one of the key takeaways is that HR is involved before the process ever starts. Before I ever get hired to an organization, HR is thinking about my job and who they need to have in that job. You can kind of compare it a little bit towards like a romantic relationship or a marriage relationship. You, if you're married, probably started thinking about what you expected in a partner long before you ever really started getting serious about an individual, because you wanted to get somebody that met certain expectations. And that's the same way it is with HR. We think about this role of accounting manager or this role of HR clerk with an idea of what somebody should be able to do it well. And long before we ever interview you, we've thought about the job and what we're trying to accomplish. So before we even start hiring somebody, HR is involved with planning, looking at what kinds of needs we have as we narrow down to specific roles, looking at what that job entails, what a job description would look like, what the skills are that somebody needs to fill them. Once we understand what we're trying to hire for, then we start taking on new roles where we were planning before. Now we're recruiting, and that's the idea, or sourcing. That's the idea of getting people interested in our jobs so that they apply. Recruiting is simply putting information out there and seeing who comes. Maybe it's a little bit more aggressive than that. Sourcing is ultra aggressive. I can't hope that a good accountant will apply for my job. I've got to go to where accountants are and find them and encourage them to come. So there's much more proactive, aggressive in sourcing, but recruiting is also some of that. So recruiting is the idea of getting qualified people to apply. And then selecting involves interviewing, but it's the process we go through to figure out who's the best of those who apply. So recruiting and selecting happens before a position is being filled. It's what we do in order to fill that position. Once we've selected somebody and we hire somebody and they become an employee, we shift roles a little bit. Now it's not trying to get them here, it's trying to get them going and keep them here. So we do things like training and development that can start as early as orientation, training them about us, training them about what we want to do. Once they get going with what they do, 6 months, a year, 2 years passes, we start thinking about what do we want from them next. Right now we want them to be able to do basic accounting stuff. But maybe after a year or two we think, you know what, we can see this person moving into a leadership role, a management role, a VP role, but they're not ready yet. So training is helping you do the job right now and do it better. Development is getting you ready for the next job, and HR is involved in both of those things, the training and the development. What do you need to do to stay interested? You need to get feedback. You need to get a performance appraisal. That's a big role of HR. Not necessarily designing those things, certainly not doing those things, but organizing the process, training managers on how to do them effectively and correctly. So performance appraisals to give feedback on how employees are doing. one of the things that you want the most, besides feedback, is good pay and good benefits. And HR is the group that typically evaluates jobs and says, this is what we ought to be willing to pay. Managers, when you make an offer to a candidate, it needs to be no less than this and no more than that, somewhere in between based upon experience and education. So setting compensation bands or ranges for particular jobs, and then regularly assessing the employees and say, what kind of benefits do you want? Health, medical, long-term disability, cancer? Do you want perks like private parking places, or whatever else? Do you want us to have a laundry service where we can take your clothes out to the laundromat and pick them up for you, save you having to do that? Perks, compensation, benefits, big part of what HR does. Also, productivity improvement programs to help us get future outcomes more accurately and more predictably than maybe we've done in the past. HR also is involved after you're no longer with us. Perhaps you work with us for a long time and then you retire. Well, HR is involved in helping you transition into retirement. HR is involved with helping you set up retirement plans, pension plans, savings plans, things like that. We help with the paperwork that's involved in working out of the workplace. Even perhaps when it's time for you to go meet your maker or go on to whatever it is that comes after this in your view of the world, dealing with your family, those you leave behind, with insurance benefits and things like that. If your role is terminated, the HR helps with unemployment insurance claims and things like that. If you're injured on the job, HR helps with workers' compensation. HR also helps with policies around the organization and procedures and things like that. Also, in addition to what's going on within the organization, HR is very active in exterior things like keeping up with laws. In chapters 2 and 3, I think it is, we're going to start getting into a lot of laws. Americans with Disabilities Act, Pregnancy Discrimination Acts, Title VII, the Civil Rights Act, all these kinds of things. Managers don't have time to keep up with those, so HR does. If it involves an employee, HR is involved with understanding what the requirements are. So legal and environmental issues that shape the workplace. Workplace justice laws like discrimination and inclusion, inclusivity, those kinds of things. Unions, if there is a union, HR is usually involved with negotiating of contracts. Until there's a union, HR tries to stand in the gap for the employee so that the employee doesn't need a union. One of the main reasons why unions form is because employees don't feel like they have a voice. Management just doesn't listen. If HR is there to listen, then that need is met and there's less need or perception, assuming other things are equal, safety is there, pay is there, whatever, for unions to form. So union influences, that's HR is kind of like a union. It's a friendly to both sides kind of intermediary. Safety and health, also a big part of HR, making sure that people are trained on equipment and chemicals and things like that. And making sure that everything is working the way it's supposed to. And then finally, international kinds of things. As we grow and grow and grow and eventually start to go global, things are not the same there as they are here. Gosh, even in America's Georgia, you go to Atlanta and things are different. Certainly if you go to New York, things are different. But golly, imagine going to Saudi Arabia, very, very different. So what I want you to take home with you from this first little lesson that is hopefully going to be less than 10 minutes to listen to is that there's a lot of things HR is involved in. From a test perspective, I want you to understand, be able to say, here's 5. We covered 10 or 12. I'm not going to ask you to know all those things, but I'd like you to have the freedom to say, here's 5 that come to mind right away, maybe 6, I don't know. But to be able to list like training and development, comp and benefits, unions, whatever the case may be. That's the big takeaway from the first lesson here, and we'll leave it there for now to keep it from being too overwhelming. Hope that gives you a good introduction to what HR is. I'll have these little things regularly for you every week. Let me know how I can do them better.